So we would like to, the purpose of this meeting would be to, the main purpose of this meeting would be to come to an agreement on the way forward with the working group, which is the milestones and work items. We would like to spend the amount of time necessary for that, and hopefully come to an agreement. And depending on if time remains, then we may have a presentation by Ed about a security protocol. We are really lucky to have someone who volunteered to be a working group secretary, Ed. Ed, please say hello. So he will be helping the chairs on the various tests that we have. The blue sheets are being circulated. Please sign. Any volunteers for scribing and providing and taking some notes? Ed, okay, thank you. Any changes you want to see on the agenda? Once, okay. So to help have a discussion about the milestones, let me see if this goes well. We've done two things in the working group since we chartered. One is identifying a list of work items, which is on your left, if you may recall. And we essentially list a list of potential work items, and then something that could be done later, and later or never. Then we worked on the use cases, and we agreed on those some time ago. So I'm not going through all of them in detail. So what we try to do is then kind of combine those two into things that are more clearly milestones and deliverable and work items, which is the thing I just presented. So I'm not sure I will be able to play between those two all the time, but if we need, then we'll do. So I did the first version of it, and then so that I'm not looking like completely stupid in front of people, I asked clever people, more clever than me, to review it, and we came into this this afternoon. And so this is far from being, the answer of the milestones, but just a proposal to discuss, help to discuss within the working group. So the milestones are listed there with the potential status, such as standards tracks or informational, and below are work items who do not have specific deliverables. And there's a remaining topic at the bottom that the people in the room agreed to. Maybe we should think about discussing with the ops area about network management before converting this into any milestone. So the chairs would like to see if you have comments, suggestion, proposals, changes that make sense for those milestones and work items. The mic is on the floor now. Including, I agree.
World's shortest work group meeting. Kevin Fall, Carnegie Mellon. So in listing these, you mean to achieve some consensus document results on each one of these things? Is that what you mean by is that the semantics of it being up here in a bullet?
So, you take those. So, these will be milestones.
Use the mic.
Oh yeah, you may need to be in front. Okay. So, yeah, so each of these will be milestones, i.e. documents, deliverables, right?
Okay.
Where the main topic of the document is there,
I guess what I'm really saying is, for example, if you have hop count on there, and it is determined at some point that having a hop count is not a good idea, there would be a statement in a revised 50/50 about it.
These are the topics that looks like should be touched there, but we may, the working group is God, right?
Yeah, well, I just said, in putting the bullet there, you're saying this should be covered somehow, right?
Wait.
Discussed.
Right.
This is not necessarily what will be in the final document.
I know, but this is the working consensus about what would be touched in the document, right?
And, if it doesn't make sense, then we just remove it. But I don't think we need to specify the whole table of contents of each document at this point.
No, I'm just trying to understand what you meant by it being as a working sort of draft item there. These would be things up to this point people seem to want to discuss.
Yes.
Yes.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, and those sub-bullets are essentially extracted from the previous discussions we had. So there's nothing new there.
Okay.
It was just grouped so that we have an idea where they go to in terms of documents and deliverables.
Right.
Given, for example, outcome was a topic where some of the discussion where maybe it's a header thing, so it would be in 50/50. But if the working group finds that is not useful, not relevant, or done other ways, then we'll just remove it. There's no contract there.
Right.
Hi, Rick Taylor, Airbus. I just want to reiterate one of the topics that came out of the conversation earlier on, which was a general intention to keep the documents short and sweet, rather than trying to put addressing into the 50/50 BIS document. The sort of rough consensus we had in the pre-meeting was short, sweet documents, and I'm hoping that the working group kind of agrees with that approach, rather than writing monolithic tomes.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that, Rick, because that is an important point. Any other comments?
I think the chairs would need to know, and the AD, that you support this. So it would be good that you come to the mic if you support or you disagree. If you're all silent, then we're not sure we're making progress.
Scott Burley at JPL, and I just, in response to this urgent plea, yes, I think it's a good idea. I think these are fine. I endorse this list here.
Hi, I'm Nabil Ben Ammar, ISOC Fellow to the IETF. I'd like just to ask about static routing and the position of informational. Should this working group tackle the routing protocols used in DTN and in different environments like vehicular delay tolerant networks like Epidemic, MaxProp, and other routing protocols to test and to have an idea about the feasibility of these routing protocols on these days DTN, or it's something else? Thanks.
So that topic has actually come up several times, and when we first discussed it during November, this is something that people are interested in, but as soon as we started talking about how we would do it, it quickly got to the point of people really weren't sure yet. So it got put on the list of secondary items. One way of looking at that is there are things that we could potentially talk to the DTN RG about to see if there's interest there to start picking up this stuff, with the idea that we have a path for taking work out of the RG and bring it into the IETF for standardization if there's something that fits in there. But right now I don't think that the dynamic routing within a DTN is something that we really would bite off here. That didn't seem to be at the top of the priority list during our discussions. Bob?
Yes, Bob Cole, and I'm coming into this late, so kick me out of here if I...
Okay, sit down.
The bullet on convergence layer adapter requirements. So I think there's kind of two different scenarios where DTN's considered being deployed, space and terrestrial. Does it deserve a bigger requirements discussion about, when you get into trade-offs between large bundles, small bundles, error correction, how to converge on, a noisy DIL environment versus, long distance, high delay. How do you make those trades in this working group?
So, Scott, you can jump up and correct me if I say this incorrectly. These requirements were not necessarily to cover all those cases. It's the minimum set of things that the bundle protocol would expect to have from a convergence layer.
Okay. I'll think about that. I'm not sure what you said, but I'll think about it first. Thanks.
See, he's going to correct me so he gets a little bit of clarity.
No, I just want to amplify a little bit. Scott Burley, just say a little bit more about this. I think what we were talking about in terms of the requirements on the convergence layer, there's a certain... the intent is to provide some hints to the implementer as to the implementer of a convergence layer adapter as to what the adapter needs to be able to do, what the functions are that have to be performed in order for it to be successful in the context of bundle protocol. The specific requirements that would motivate the selection of one convergence layer adapter, convergence layer protocol over another are a really interesting topic, but I think that they're other than maybe informational and as examples in the bundle protocol spec, I think they definitely should not be there shouldn't be any normative language in the bundle protocol spec that says use this under these conditions. I think there will be deployment and operational lore that will emerge from operating the protocols, and eventually that maybe needs to be standardized somewhere. But I think it'd be way premature to start trying to dictate to people use this convergence layer protocol under these circumstances.
Ron Eintveld. To me, this looks like the list that we agreed upon in the interim meeting that we had in December, the WebEx meeting. So, yeah, I support this.
Rick Taylor again. First off, I support this, and then because we've all gone a bit quiet, can I ask the question to the chairs, really? Mm-hmm. What's next? How do we start this?
For those of you not paying attention, we were trying to get Martin's attention. The primary thing here is that we just have to identify the milestones, and the milestones are an agreement between the work group and the AD. So once we have a a rough estimate of when we think those things would be ready to move, we can update the milestones. Martin can beat us over the head because we're way too optimistic. We can then start working, which means if people have ideas of ones they want to take responsibility for, we can start writing names down and getting that work started.
Okay, I'll start the queue. Rick Taylor again. I would like to do investigate enhanced neighbour discovery protocol work item, please.
Okay.
You're taking notes, right?
Yeah, me as an AD, maybe I can do it completely
Let's take-
different and squeeze here even more work items in it. So like, usually we squeeze down. So, but
Yeah.
For example,
So you're asking us to cut down the number of,
Fred Templin from Boeing. I don't know if you're looking for volunteers for all of these, but I'd like to work the addressing architecture as editor.
John Dowdle, Airbus. Yes, I support this. I'd like to pick up the static routing.
Yes, Nabil bin Ammar. I support these milestones, and I can work on any item like static routing, for example.
Scott Burley again, and I would happily volunteer to work on the revision of RFC 5050.
Ron Entveld, I am also interested in the revision of 50/50, maybe to safeguard that no babies are thrown out with the bathwater. I'm also interested to do work on neighbor discovery.
Kevin Fall again, +1 for the 50/50 part. Also, there's a legacy thing in enhanced neighbor discovery that I think never became an RFC out of DTN RG that may be worth discussing, that I'm happy to do so as well.
I hope our secretary is taking notes of names.
His fingers are smoking.
Fred Templin, Boeing again. So I should also say we're investigating security key management and put out a requirements and design draft on that we announced on the list.
Steve Astanados, and I know that there is no Jabber scribe, and someone asked a question in Jabber, so I relate.
Thank you very much.
So relaying Will Ivansik, and he asked what is the difference between node neighbor discovery and enhanced neighbor discovery.
Oh, enhanced, okay. That's...
The one listed. The one listed as current, and then the one that says investigate enhanced. That was the question?
I don't know. He might answer.
Okay. Well, let me answer the question I think was asked. So the one that's listed above in milestones is taking what was done in the RG and standardizing it. The work item down at the bottom, which doesn't have a deliverable right now, is actually looking at other potential options for doing neighbor discovery. Rick had actually mentioned one that was in the Man A working group that may have some applicability, but we need to determine if that makes any sense.
Okay, I think he's satisfied, or he can ask. Thanks.
Okay. Good for security.
This is Ed Brain from APL. +1 that these are good milestones and work items. I would like to work on security protocol and generally security models for DTN. If you have come and volunteered, please see me at the end of the meeting so I can make sure that I have names appropriate. Thank you.
Rick Taylor again. One thing these milestones and work items there's no dependency graph obviously here, and I know we're trying to do some of this work in parallel to show progress, but the 50/50 potential BIS is quite an important piece of work, and so I'm not sure how that needs to be recorded, if it does need to be recorded, but there has to be an understanding that some things have got to make progress faster than others. I just felt it ought to be said.
Yeah, that's that's a good point, and what we'll end up seeing is that as far as advancing it for publication, 50/50 BIS would have to go first, right?
Scott Burley again, and actually along pretty much the same lines. If it is envisioned that we'll have a document for the addressing architecture, it's possible that might need to be developed before the RFC 50/50 document. And in any case, I'm volunteering to work on that one as well. It's very important to me.
Are there any that aren't covered?
No, we have editors for all. I'm impressed. Well, the registry of service identifiers, I have a draft already, so.
So Mark's volunteering.
Yeah. So the only one that nobody take on was the registry of service identifiers, which I already have a draft that was pretty advanced, so I could take this one on. Any other? So I haven't heard any people saying wrong or anything, and we've heard almost 2 editors or 2 people per document per milestone, at least, to be interested in working on them. So it looks, well, seems to me that we're pretty good for. Is our AD happy with this?
Happier than his last working group.
Are you happy, or if we put this on the tracker, we'll be okay?
Rick Taylor, with a sort of question for the room and the remote participants. Network management. The intention, I understood it, was that we should discuss it with the ops area. Are people happy with saying, we'll discuss that with the ops area and not really work on it in this cycle? I know personally I am, because it's a massive topic. But equally, we got to do it at some point. I just want to see how the room feels before we just go ahead, because it's at the bottom of the PowerPoint.
Yeah, as I said in our previous meeting, is that it seems to me that the network without network management being deployed doesn't make any sense. So I think that's however, we don't kind of know how to approach it. There's some work already done, so.
So I was actually going to elaborate a little bit on our conversation that on first blush, the existing IETF model of network management, i.e. SNMP or Netcomp Yang, doesn't seem to be quite a good fit for this. But in order to really make that point clear, one of the things that we had talked about was actually having a discussion within the ops area to make sure that we weren't missing something obvious where one of those things could be applied. So, part of the reason why it's listed down here as a question mark and a discuss is because we need to have that discussion before we start jumping into trying to write documents that cover that.
Do we need a document saying, a sort of a position paper document saying, look, network management for DTN is a tough topic, that we can then take to the ops area as a position piece, or can that just be done in corridors? I don't want to make more work, but I'm wondering whether by not having something formal in the pipeline and relying on chats with ADs and that kind of thing, whether things will get dropped.
If I'm not going to volunteer anybody to do this, but we developed the use cases on the wiki. I would have no problems with having another entry on the wiki that talks about the network management considerations, so that we have something concrete to show to the ops area saying, hey, this is what we're looking at, and it doesn't look like SNMP or Netcomp is going to solve that for us. Please tell us that we're wrong and that it will work, or help us understand what direction we need to be moving in order to do it. I want to try and keep it as lightweight as possible.
Just to continue that discussion, there has been
Can you state your name for the
I'm sorry,
for the minute taker?
Ed, this is Ed. Ed Brain, APL. There has been some work in that area to describe desirable properties, requirements, unique constraints, and the definition of network management at levels in DTNs. With working with anyone, I'm happy to pull that information together, put some information that we already have up on the wiki to start that discussion, because I do think we're reasonably far along in describing at least what we think the desirable properties for that would be.
Great.
This is Bob Cole. I don't have a management comment, so I have a different comment or question. So, have you guys discussed time frames for these things, or is it too early? Do you have to go to the authors and?
We think that within a month we'll be all done.
Great. No, I mean seriously, is this like do you view 50-50 a 2-year effort out, or?
So I can't remember if it was in our meeting or some. Actually, I think it was our meeting where I said if it was beyond 18 months, I was going to pull my hair out.
Oh, okay.
What's left of it. So I'm actually hoping that we can move pretty quickly. I'll leave it to the people who are writing the documents and discussions within the working group to see if we can actually hit those kinds of time frames. But
and I think we expect even if at the end there's a graph of dependencies between the documents, we expect to work them in parallel and to converge at some point. So we should not try to start with one and everybody is waiting for the first one to finish. So even if we know there are dependencies, we can work in parallel. So that could help, finishing in this decade.
Any other comments? Rick can't make up his mind.
I'm just making noise now. Rick Taylor again. Did anyone put their hand up to security? Because I know there's... Oh, Ed did.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go and sit down again.
All right, so with my half of the hat on, I think the way to go is for the people who volunteered to start thinking about, within the next week or two, how long they think it would take to write such a document, and maybe just consider what your dependencies would actually be. And that way, if we have that information, then Mark and I can take a cut at a more global list of deadlines that we can put into milestones, and then we can bring it back to the working group and just have a quick discussion on the list about it. Does that work? Excellent.
Okay. Ed, you want to talk about your security, actually? I don't have your presentation, so do you bring your laptop or the whole shebang, or?
I do have it here. Were I able to may I plug in?
Oh, sure. So while Ed is preparing, the only thing, if we hear there's a clear consensus and agreement on those, the only piece remaining that is we need kind of a time frame for the different documents, and then we can input it in the tracker. So as Brian was saying, the editor is the one that express interest as soon as you give us some time, some dates. And then we'll put it. This is like the very last things that we need.
Can you hear me in the room? Okay, so I wanted to talk for a little while about security models for DTN. We have something called the Streamlined Bundle Security Protocol. Just as a point of reference to help target the remainder of the discussion, Who here has familiarity with RFC 6257, the bundle security protocol? Okay, so that's a little less than half of the room. So we have, if you put an agenda slide up, everyone falls asleep, but if you put the agenda as part of the title, everyone says, that's a great title. Looking through the history, recommendations, implementation status, and what is there to do using this particular view of security, and whether this particular view of security is the view that we would like to adopt in the working group. So a quite simplified picture here, which illustrates some of the use cases that were motivating to our example, was how do we work at a variety of layers to secure things within our individual enclaves, between them, understanding that security may be different between enclaves at borders, and there may be obviously nodes where we don't have any trust model whatsoever. Originally, link layer security was how we did this. At the application layer, we need an end-to-end model because clearly when you have different classes of users coming into a system like this and reusing the individual links, you have shared access to the links and you need a higher level of fidelity. Additionally, from endpoint services that cross enclaves, if you need authentication, confidentiality, and integrity end-to-end, you may apply those services somewhat differently in your network, meaning that perhaps authentication or maybe just integrity within your enclave, perhaps confidentiality, and perhaps additional integrity between your enclaves. So in this model, how do we handle this at the bundle layer? So we came up with a set of desirable properties. I think I said desirable properties in the network management comments as well. It is a favorite term of mine. We wanted atomic services, and this is, again, pulling off of some of the insights from the original bundle security protocol. Each bundle has to take with it some of its security considerations, as opposed to relying on the underlying link to provide all of the security. And because of the disrupted and delayed and queued nature of bundles, it is best to keep the security services with the bundle itself and not as part of some overarching or encapsulating or supporting aspect. We focus on the services of authentication, integrity, and confidentiality, where we differentiate authentication and integrity by saying that authentication is single hop between security aware single hops in the bundle network, and integrity is an end-to-end service. There are times when we need to take these atomic services and cascade them so that we can apply them multiple times. This was an observation made in BSP, and the original 6257 mechanism for that was a little too recursive, and you could get into quite a bit of complexity as you cascaded these operations. But there are still cases where you may want to apply them, and what is the appropriate way forward, reducing complexity but also yielding the benefits that you need. And lastly, we wanted to understand where encapsulation provided services that could simplify individual security bundles. So taking all of that as the motivating problem and some of the desirable properties of a security model, we look at the R6257, which was the original security protocol. It came out in May of 2011. Has it been that long? It's been that long. It's May of 2011. We did initial implementations by a couple of folks. We did the BSP implementation in ION. The folks from LTS did an initial implementation in DTN2. The way that BSP worked was it uses the extension block mechanism to put the security primitives into the bundle itself so that security is carried with the bundle, and it described 4 of them. A bundle authentication block or blocks, which served as a bundle hop to bundle hop, basically oftentimes a signed checksum so that you knew who the sender of the bundle was. You had integrity and confidentiality on the payload end to end, and you had something called extension security blocks, which dealt in some way with somehow applying security services to extension blocks, so that there was some ambiguity there. These services of authentication, integrity, and confidentiality could be brought with multiple blocks. For example, bundle authentication would typically have a block at the beginning pre-payload and also an additional block post-payload, so that if you were processing large bundles, You could look at a header but not have to worry about a remember result until you get to the end from a processing perspective. And then separate from the block structure, various cipher suites could be used to generate ciphertext and parameters and populate those blocks. And a graphical example of that is here, where you would have a bundle with a primary block, an extension block, which was a BAB, payload, and then a cutoff at the bottom of the presentation, another extension block, and perhaps also integrity on the payload. So this is what we mean when we say that bundles would like to take their security with them. They're using the extension block mechanisms to get those secondary headers and trailers. As we implemented this, there were a couple of observations. One was there was a concept of a security source and a security destination for a block. And the idea that this was supporting in cascading operations was that at some point in the routing of the bundle, you may get to a bundle agent that would say, from this point forward, you have to encrypt. Or from this point forward, you have to apply integrity. And when you get to another piece of the network, you can remove that. In the simple case, the initiating security operation happens at the bundle source. And in the simple case, it is removed at the bundle destination. But that requirement was not there in BSP, so that you could have a waypoint, which in this picture is located as a security source, which is separate from the bundle source, and a security destination, which was separate from the bundle destination. And it was a mechanism for trying to do a security tunnel without creating a security tunnel. The good part of that was that if you understood the path, the likely path, or at least the entry and ingress and egress points of a bundle through some sort of a network cloud, you could apply that. If you didn't, or if the bundle wound up going to a security source and then taking a different path to the destination without actually going through the security destination, you could find yourself in a bind where you are unable to decrypt or integrity sign part of your bundle. And the larger observation here was that there became a coupling between security and routing in this case, and it became very, very difficult to implement that in all of the deployment scenarios. So starting with that, we looked at some lessons learned off of the implementations of BSP, and we came up with 5 recommendations. One was, just as we said, to seek to decouple the routing and the security functions. The other is to make the common cases simple and efficient. What that was getting to was making sure that as we had cascading operations, as we understood where blocks were being put, that we were able to create what we considered to be the general and most often used cases of integrity and confidentiality, very quick to process at the bundle agents. We wanted to make sure that all of the block types, not just the payload block, had the same basic security services applied to them. Integrity and confidentiality across all of the extension blocks. We wanted to make more deterministic statements about how we handled fragmentation. In the BSP, there were several cases where if you had security set in a certain way, if you did your fragmentation in a certain way, if you had partial reassembly or full reassembly in a certain way, you could get into lots of trouble, and there were many, many discussions and examples around that. And finally, looking through the BSP document itself, as the document evolved, we saw lots of different kinds of information being put together in a very large document. Rick, this is to your point about many small RFCs rather than the monolithic tomes. Generally, we pulled out protocol, policy, and configuration as kinds of information necessary for security model, but perhaps not necessary to be in a single document. So what we had proposed, I believe at IETF 87, perhaps 88, was to break this out into an overall security model for DTN, where we talk about protocols separate from best practices, separate from configuration and policy. So if we look at BSP, we claim that a streamlined version of that, whether it remains called the streamlined BSP or something else, could be brought forward, which was a simpler protocol that handled the desirable properties we were looking for in these models, but that other protocols, such as Scott's bundle and bundle encapsulation, and others that we have not completely thought of yet, would be able to be combined in a series of best practices to get the kind of security results that we need. And then policy being both perhaps fragmentation strategies and required cipher suites could be, again, a third type of document. In the BSP, it was mandated that certain cipher suites had to be supported. And the difficulty with that is across the entire user community. Not everyone wants to use symmetric key. Not everyone wants to use asymmetric key. It's really hard to tell people that they have to support HMAC SHA-1 credibly. And if at least there were different specs or families or categories or groupings of cipher suites, that's something that can be taken into a different document, and as that is maintained in some way, then that doesn't affect the core protocols or perhaps the best practices. So if we look at the first part of this, which is the SPSP protocol, we have an initial draft out. It is up for review. The URL for it is down here. But we can send it around. We decouple the security and the routing by removing the security source and security destination, with the only exception for that being authentication, which is defined as being the next hop. You know that if you were doing one-hop security authentication, you can speak intelligently about the destination because by definition it is where you were sending the bundle. Beyond that, it becomes very hard to understand the route that you can take when you get 2 or 3 or 4 security hops away. We define 3 security block types, not 4, to partly simplify processing and also to make the ability to apply security to extension blocks. So we have block confidentiality blocks separate from payload confidentiality blocks. And we have block integrity blocks separate from payload integrity blocks. And they can be applied with the same rules across all of the different kinds of blocks, treating the payload as an extension block in this case. To that point, we then, a deterministic block processing order falls out. And just as a way of talking about this in spec, we introduced some terminology called the security operation, which is a service followed by a target. A target is an extension block in a bundle that is uniquely named. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And a service are the 3 core services of authentication, integrity, and confidentiality. The design decision that we made to make this streamlined and to try and reduce the amount of recursive cascading operation was to assert that only one unique combination of service and target is allowed in a bundle at once. So if you say integrity payload and then you say confidentiality payload, you're not allowed to then do another integrity payload and another confidentiality payload and another integrity payload. We treat the extension blocks the same as the payloads. I mentioned that already. We also wanted to try and create support for primary block integrity, which is to generate a mutable version of the primary block, sign that, and hold the signing of that in its own integrity block. And that came about from some of our user community discussions as something that was both desirable and possible to do. We're getting to the end of what's viewable here. We talked about simplifying the rules for fragmentation, and we had done a great deal of effort to reduce the rules around whether security could be even applied to fragments, and that has made the world better. Through some list discussion, we found some additional loopholes to close around fragmentation, but I think we're well on the way to addressing some of those issues. So what is there to do? We had an original version of SPSP that was published in the DTNRG. We made a 0.1 version. We had received a few small comments on that, and we've moved it over as a draft to the DTNWG, and comments on it are much appreciated. There are a couple of things that we know we're going to change through this mechanism. The first is that RFC5050 does not currently have a mechanism for uniquely identifying an extension block type, an extension block instance. There is clearly an extension block type, but if you have 2 extension blocks of the same type, there is no way in the block header itself to say that this is instance 1 of that type and this is instance 2. So what we have done now is we've created a creative solution where we put some information and dictionary offsets that provides a unique identifier, and that is certainly functional, but clearly if RFC5050 Viz identifies or adds an identification to extension blocks, we would adopt that mechanism as opposed to what we're doing right now. There was discussion over the reality that in actual networks, the next bundle protocol hop may not be security aware because this is an extension service, and what do we do about that? And we talked about 2 ways to handle that. I have defined them as restrictive and permissive authentication. Restrictive is if I get to a bundle agent and the bundle agent does not understand security, and yet there is security stuff, especially for authentication in the bundle, what do we do? So we can set the, if you cannot process this block flag, do you drop the block or do you drop the bundle? You need to do one of those two things, because you have a security service that is meant to be hop to hop, and you've now gone one hop and you've reached something that doesn't understand a security service. As a matter of policy, you should be able to either say, something has gone terribly wrong, I don't understand the security topology of my network, kill the whole bundle, and we don't want it to proceed anymore, because it cannot pass if it cannot be authenticated. A separate policy is to say, well, authentication just means we got here. If I don't care about security, then, well, maybe I just drop the block and continue processing it. And that is also something that is defensible based on certain network deployments and certain use cases. So we identified the need to handle each of those as a matter of policy.
I have a question.
Sure.
Come fall. So this is in little ways resembling source routing, loose source routing, or strict source routing. And I can imagine another option being don't do anything. Don't drop anything in particular, forward it along the path. We could debate what the semantics then about authentication for one hop really means, but it seems like that would be a useful, practical case that would come up from time to time.
So it may be, and that was actually the initial stance, was that by definition, security was hop to hop, with the assumption of was bundle node to bundle node hop, and the assumption was security was there, but if not, we didn't address what to do. In trying to come up with whether we had 2 options or 3 options, with yours being the third option of do nothing, it does violate the semantics of single hop authentication in the bundle topology. Now, that doesn't mean we can't add it as a point of policy, but that's probably something we want to discuss.
Yeah, I think the generalization of the question is it single hop or is it some hop?
So authentication, separate from integrity, was meant to be single hop, with integrity being end-to-end, with end-to-end either being bundle source to bundle destination end-to-end, or end-to-end being the ends of some tunnel if you're doing an encapsulation scheme. There has been some discussion on fragmentation and its interaction with security, and there has been a review on the block nesting restrictions. What I mean by that, and it's a shame that this is cut off, is in the order in which you apply, and I don't know that I can fix it, the order in which you apply integrity and confidentiality may matter. Are you allowed to integrity sign something that has already been encrypted, or encrypt something that has already been integrity signed? The reason why that comes up is there are certain cases, if we go back to the initial network deployment diagram, where you may, typically if you want both, you will typically apply both, and you will typically use a cipher suite that gives you both, and gives you an integrity as additional authenticated data or something like that. However, if your source says, please only integrity sign while you are within my enclave, and then if you have a border gateway that is then applying additional encryption because it is going outside of your enclave, there are examples where the source of a security block may be different than the bundle source, in which case you need to understand when and where you allow sources to be added by other bundles. And that is addressed in the spec. And a question came up on the mailing list of not whether we should enforce an ordering, but whether we had enforced the correct ordering, which was integrity over confidentiality as opposed to confidentiality over integrity, which is a minor point, but it was well, minor points are important when you're talking about security. Going forward, if I back up briefly to this, we have the initial case of the SBSP. There is an initial implementation that Scott Burley wrote for SBSP and ION so that we could generate some performance data in a variety of scenarios. The bundle and bundle encapsulation spec has also been written, and there is also a reference implementation of that in the ION repository. We are starting to work on some best practices documentation and capturing some of the cipher suites to this model. And where we are with that is, again, going through and trying to develop cipher suite specs for symmetric and suite B, and looking through some of the cases which may drive things like multiple parallel authenticators, which was a discussion item in the original BSP spec, as well as trying to identify what are the most sensible security compatibility profiles. We are early on in this work, but again, if this is a security model that we adopt in the working group, there are several documents that we would need to bring together. Security compatibility profiles and site for suite definitions being one of them. The other being general policy considerations, which is whether it is simply the configuration of SPSP or whether it is more holistic. How do you respond to a variety of events in a secure DTN? And this is an eye chart, and I don't expect folks to read it, although these will, of course, be posted. What do you do when less security than is required is received in a bundle? So if bundles take their security with them, if you as a bundle protocol agent that is security aware have expectations and the bundle does not meet them, what do you do? What do you do when more security is required? What do you do in terms of evaluating security in transit if you are not an endpoint? Obviously the fragmentation, and then block and bundle severability, which goes back to the point that Kevin, you asked the question on, which is when is it appropriate to drop the block versus dropping the bundle, or to your point, in which cases is it best just to leave it all alone? Finally, again, separate from individual security policy is what we're considering a best practices document, which talks about how you achieve basic security services using a variety of configuration, policy, and protocol specification. And this is where the encapsulation and the tunneling point came in. That is not always the answer, but it sometimes is. And the question then is, if you can identify what are common, well-defined security capabilities, basic security services such as authentication, integrity, and confidentiality, primary block privacy, primary block integrity, cascading operations, intermediate destinations, path verifications, multiple parallel authenticators, and others as we are collecting them, how do you make sure you do them with the set of small, non-monolithic RFCs working together? And that is a meta document, if you will, that can talk about how you achieve these services with what we have. Again, the smaller distributed model being the goal. And that's what I have. So where we are right now is we have BIB-E, we have SPSP, we have initial implementations of those. We know there are some areas where we want to do something differently, but we would request folks to review the specs and provide comment.
So, John Dowdle, Airbus. Yeah, I've read your draft. Great, like it. I feel the draft would benefit from some explanation at the beginning as to why this is better than the BSP. It might be there, I might have missed it, but I know you spent several slides discussing the whys and wherefores and whatever, and I guess we can't deprecate BSP. It's not an IETF thing to do that sort of thing. But is it IETF practice to say, actually, we'd rather use this one rather than this other one over here?
So that's a very interesting question, and very interesting, especially since I don't have an answer for it. But the question is that 6257 is an experimental RFC out of the RG. What does that mean in terms of writing a different standard to accomplish a similar result in the WG? It is listed as reference, but do we continue to call this a streamlined bundle security protocol? Do we name it something else? Is there the feeling that it is changing or supplanting one or the other as we go forward? So I would appreciate any education or insight into how to talk about that.
I'll comment, Kevin Fall again. You said a different standard, so that one's not a standard.
Fair enough.
Right, so as an RG, we're not able to do that. So I think you can make statements, though, when you say this is recommend. I mean, we could even take an action and retire the other document if it's time to do that. Right, so there's plenty of mechanism available, I think.
Brian Haberman, who knows what hat I'm wearing. So in the IETF, we have any number of ways to say, do this instead of that. We can write a BCP that says, we prefer this way because of X, Y, and Z. Fine. The more useful way of doing it is to write this as a as a mandatory to implement specification. So if you're going to do security, this is the way you do the security, and ignore what's over there. I don't think we have to do anything with the security spec that came out of the research group. We just, as a working group, say, from our engineering perspective, this is the way we want to do it.
Okay. So fair enough. And so whatever the recommended mechanism is, that is.
Rick Taylor, Airbus. I'm assuming your intention is to keep this draft going through a few more iterations as it tracks the 50/50 bis. So doesn't it make sense that BSP is for 50/50 V1, and this can pretty much be the security protocol for 50/50 bis, and then there isn't really an issue there?
No, that's
you couldn't
right.
They sort of naturally deprecate each other correctly.
Well, so what I should have expanded on a little bit is when we write the security consideration section for 50/50 bis,
Yeah.
we say, do this one.
Yeah, because BSP was never built for it, has not been updated, it won't fit.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, fair enough.
Process-wise, we would, as working group, we need to first have the milestones and also agree that this is the right document to start with as a security protocol. So we need to get consensus that this is the way to go first. Well, how do we get consensus? We first have to have the milestones and then after. So I will be hunting all the document editors, volunteers to get some time frame they want, and then we can start this. Any other comment? And we're 3 minutes left for the meeting, so I think we're done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Meeting done, unless you have something else to say. Thank you very much, especially for those coming just for this meeting, and we know. And there's a blue sheets. Please bring them back up here so we can send it to the secretariat. Thank you very much. Sorry to put you on the spot, but we need to get the working group needs to.
You was telling me I was sleeping, so.
No, because the working group needs to hear you, right?
It's just late in the week, and I had a really interesting session before, so.
The sheet didn't come to me. Where is it? Or if there's it on.
Who has the blue sheets?